one. Good morning, Max Wastler. How are you?
I'm great, Lauren Yates. How are you?
So good and so good to see ya. Can you tell us where you are right now?
Sure. So I'm in my office in my house in St. Louis, Missouri, in the middle of the United States.
Yeah, right. And
And
what's it like over there right now? What's been going on in St. Louis, Missouri?
for, the sixth or seventh month of this year, there are seemingly more questions than answers. And yet we're taking it, the best we can every day. It's a challenge. This is unlike anything that I've ever lived through. I'm sure
Yeah.
you feel the same. This
Yeah,
is pretty
totally.
tough.
Did you guys have
Yeah.
a lockdown for a while?
There was there was a bit of a lockdown. Yes. Now that I'm thinking about it, it was encouraged that only essential businesses be open. But you could still, as an American and as a Missourian, we could still go to the grocery store. We could still, run necessary errands, go to the doctor if we needed to go to the doctor. So nothing to the level that others have experienced where they were fully locked down, fully in quarantine. In fact, around the time that it got pretty bad in the States, I was intending to have a spring break with my family in Colorado. We were going skiing, and it was heartbreaking to watch. I have a 9-year-old and 12-year-old stepdaughter, and it was heartbreaking to watch them wipe down the airplane seats. And we weren't wearing masks at the time. I don't think that that had been in the dialogue yet, but everyone was very protective, and we were washing our hands constantly. And we got to Colorado. I skied for one day, and the governor shut down all of the resorts, all of the mountains, all of the ski lifts. And so we frantically booked air flights the next morning and came back home. I bought a coffee maker like that day, and it has really paid off. I have to say.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I feel like a lot of people
but
have been buying coffee makers and cooking at home, and yeah, but so devastating about your family holiday. Like that kind of happened.
It's
Yeah.
it's the least. The least. I
Yeah.
mean, people have suffered so much far worse, and the countless deaths that we've seen, the countless illnesses that we've seen.
Yeah.
It's really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And so for the last year or so, I've been working as the sort of the brand director for a 125-year-old family-owned business here in St. Louis. The family's called Merritts. They were a Swiss family that came over in 1894 and established a jewelry and imports business. And at the turn of the Great Depression in 1929, they pivoted to the incentives industry. They started selling their jewelry as an incentive piece to other businesses, so a B2B of the earliest incarnation. And they invented the incentives industry. And I'm helping to tell that story for them.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Can you explain what the incentives industry is? I have no idea what you're talking about right now.
So if you've ever signed up for a credit card with an airline, we probably had something to do with that. If you've ever gotten points, to use towards a prize closet or anything like that, that's the incentives. And then travel is a big part of our business. And travel was the first industry impacted by this.
Yeah,
travel,
and
it will likely be the last to recover.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think globally, there's only going to be a handful of airlines that can continue to run, make it through this. Hospitality and travel have been the main hit. It reminds me of.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
yeah.
Where are you in the world right now? Are you in Bangkok?
I'm in Bangkok right now. Yeah. I've been in Bangkok since March because I came from France, and when things were starting to get bad, I I thought, okay, I need to go back to Bangkok, which is where my business is based. I need to, otherwise I'm going to lose my business. And my parents are here. And, like I just felt like I needed to hold the fort a little bit. And it definitely, here, we didn't actually go into a full lockdown. Like things didn't go to a complete standstill as it did in Europe and in America and in Australia. I feel like in Asia we have such a different culture here. We have like a very cooperative, I don't want to use the word compliant, but in a way compliant society where people do respect the rules and people do chip in and like take all the necessary measures. And we are no strangers to disease and outbreak. So, it's taken very seriously here. And as a result, honestly, Thailand has done really well through this, the pandemic. And I think, not economically though, there has been like quite a big economic fallout because we are a manufacturing country. We are a very big tourist destination. And so, cutting the international tourism has caused big job loss here. But in terms of controlling the disease, I feel like big ups to the public health authority that we have here. It's like the system is a very grassroots system here. In every district, we have a health officer, and that is a group, like that is a managed group of volunteers who really have their eyes on the ground, are in very close connection with that local district community, and therefore any new like health precautions or new measures can be really quickly implemented into society and respected. So yeah, really big difference here. It's very interesting.
You talked about a lot of things there, and one of the things that I've seen in your Instagram stories that I was really particularly taken by is the way that your community has seen a lot of folks chip in, and it was that food sharing. Could you talk a little bit about that? That was fascinating.
The Tu Pan Suk. So we have this system. That we have this system of like just put out an old cabinet that you have in your house, put it out the front of your house on the street, and welcome people to fill it with groceries, fill it with essential foods, preferably healthy things. Like usually people put in rice, canned fish, like even toothpaste and toothbrushes, like essential things that people need. And there's this honor system of like, you take a little bit, you leave enough for other people to use as well. But there's it's nothing really new in our culture, but this is so typical of the Thai culture. It's just it's
the way that it has a ripple effect, and it does impact not just the food, but also just the way that you interact with one another. I think that's so beautiful. Does that disclude, or are food banks included in that? Do those exist as well? In Thai
there
culture?
are food banks. There are a lot of grassroots organizations that are constantly, continuously helping the underprivileged in society. I think it's a very predominantly Buddhist society where like something like in the 90 percentile range of Buddhism, like as a population, which means, which I think it's not a good or a bad thing, but it just means that there's a cohesiveness of, there's no kind of big separation in thinking, or, so when you do need to mobilize a whole society, a community, it's quite a seamless process. We've had a very different, we haven't really been affected too much, like in the day to day. But we have seen, massive job loss, and it continues because the longer that America and Europe and Australia are affected by this pandemic, the more we are economically, because we are manufacturing goods for these countries. We are servicing the tourism trade for these, other countries, and as well, China has a big impact on our tourism. Here, there's massive numbers of Chinese tourists coming to Thailand. So, yeah, like it's been really crazy here, but yeah, my hope is that, I think we're not gonna have a vaccine for quite a long time, but we do need to learn how to manage for the meantime until we do, and that means people need to cooperate and people need to wear masks and wash their hands, and it's for someone in Thailand to realize that wearing a mask has become a controversial political issue it blows our mind. So, yeah. But I want to get back to you because, yeah.
I will say that we have politicized everything in the last 6 months. It's been really hard to know how to navigate the changes that we've all experienced, because everything down to, as you said, a mask has become this hotbed topic of, well, I'm not going to let you into my business if you're wearing a mask in certain circumstances. Whoa. And in other circumstances, we've said, I'm not going to let you into my business if you are wearing a mask, right? So it's like, depending on which side of the line you're on, you take this very strong stance, and it's they're both oppressive.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so sad. Yeah. It's really so sad.
I want to talk about the Fauci cap that you've made.
So on that note, here's the Fauci.
Awesome.
It's a navy blue wool Ebbets Field flannels cap. It's made in America. We had to wait quite a while. We waited about 8 weeks for the factory to reopen safely. They are still practicing social distancing, but they put Dr. Fauci's face on the front in felt.
That's so awesome.
And embroidered it with navy. And then we put a little phrase on the back that says,
wash your hands.
This is an adjustable here. It says, wash your hands. Because at the time, April was when we made these, Dr. Fauci's message to everyone was, please allow for the medical professionals to obtain the masks that they need, wear a bandana, make a mask, find a way to protect yourself, cover your face, don't touch your face, wash your hands. So had we said wear a mask, this ball cap would have become politicized.
I feel like even washing your hands has become politicized.
I hope not.
Yeah.
I live with 3 germaphobes, so.
But I really love the fact that you made this hat, and how quick the turnaround, despite the lockdown and having to wait. Yeah, but the turnaround for the hat, I think, it's really like an awesome project that you did. It reminds me of with the masks. There's been quite a few American brands that have been making masks, like Gitman have been doing their own masks. I've seen Chris on the Instagram wearing his shirt matching his mask, but not many caps. And I think what was the thought process behind the cap?
Sure. I was in a meeting at work and someone said we were lamenting how much we missed sports. And I watch ESPN Sports Center religiously, at least 30 minutes, sometimes an hour every day, just to get the news of the day as it relates to sports. And I said offhandedly that should we be allowed to have a corporate softball team, I would want us to be called the Faucis because Dr. Fauci's White House press briefings had replaced my Sports Center. And someone said, we should get jerseys regardless. That's a great idea. And I was talking with my friend Micah Smith that night, an illustrator and art director based in Kansas City, which is about 4 hours west of St. Louis. And I was telling him that story, and he lifted up his iPad sketchpad with Dr. Fauci's face on it. And I said, let's put that on a cap. And Seattle was in the news at the time because it was the first and hardest hit with the coronavirus. And I thought, how could we support the Seattle community? Well, there's a Seattle hat maker. Why don't we do it with them? And Micah's good friend, Billy Brimblecom, provides those in need with prosthetics. And we thought this is a way to get America back on its feet, so to speak. And so we partnered with them so a portion of the proceeds from each ball cap sold will go to his organization. It's called Steps of Faith. And yeah, it kind of just happened organically like that. We sold something close to 12 dozen ball caps in the span of a couple weeks, and we're going to do a second run here in the next couple weeks. So
yeah, awesome.
Very excited.
Yeah, I love the fact that you chose Ebbetsfield flannels because they are one of my favorite hat makers. And obviously they're a heritage manufacturer, and they've been making baseball caps for, I don't know how long they have, probably
since the 80s.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And but one of the sports that has been really hardly hit by the virus is baseball. You know, we've got the NBA back in their what do they call it, a bubble, like a
in the bubble.
In the bubble. Mm-hmm. But baseball's been hasn't
Disney World.
Yeah. Baseball's been hit.
So my team is the St. Louis Cardinals. Go Cardinals. And my favorite player, Yadier Molina, he has coronavirus. Another player has come down with coronavirus as of, I think this time last night or yesterday, it was announced that they were canceling the weekend series with our Chicago rivals, the Cubs. I don't envision them being able to finish the baseball season, but far be it from me to judge or have any understanding of it. I think that the bubble does make a lot of sense. I also think it makes a ton of sense to just be safe. Yeah. So I would be willing to wait out sports for a little while longer in order to protect the widest swath of our population. Yeah,
totally. Now, I need to go back to you because, some people listening might not know about you. So I want to tell everyone that, I've been following your blog, which used to be called All Plaid Out, I feel like it's been over 10 years. It's been a long time. And for those out there who don't know, it was kind of like a beautiful universe of plaid that I used to love, scrolling through, and then you kind of were focusing on manufacturing and the beauty of heritage manufacturing. Can you tell us what your that journey has been for you and where it's taken you now?
Yeah, happily. So All Plaid Out began, it was a birthday present to myself in 2008. December of 2008, on my birthday, I signed up for the URL and started blogging on the 8th of December. Not to deflect, but I've been a fan of yours for a long time too. So I'm holding up for our listening audience. I'm holding up a Ponytail journal tote bag, which I've been very precariously delicate with. It's so good, and it stays on our doorknob going out to our car.
That's awesome.
Anytime we go to the grocery store, we rep you hard.
Thanks so much.
But All Plaid Out started for a number of reasons. I had a blog. I had a couple blogs. One was a little too confessional and a little too like cut to the bone about my feelings, and that just didn't cut it. And the other one was a little too niche. It was just mixtapes that I was sharing mostly with friends who I'd made mixtapes for growing up.
That's awesome.
And
do you still have, is that still somewhere I can find on the internet?
Sometime I will consolidate that whole journey. It was only a couple years, but it was that time in my 20s when I had no responsibilities, no money, but I lived in a town where I could walk to free shows. I could sneak into expensive shows. I could find myself in and amongst my heroes. And I did that all the time. And I became really engaged in the music community at that time. But I was living for a short time on the Upper East Side before moving to Brooklyn. When I started All Plat Out, I was in Brooklyn. And on the Upper East Side, I lived with these two guys who started a food blog. This was like 2007, I guess, 2006. And they quickly, like almost overnight, became a sensation because they spent a weekend having every meal in a different borough of New York eating pizza.
Whoa.
And that blog post just took off. And they became known as like the guys who had 5 boroughs of pizza. And they would do little gimmicky things like that all over the city, and get up at the crack of dawn and go to the fishing wharf and like document all the fish coming into the city. And it's fascinating. Millions and millions of pounds of fish get consumed in New York City every day. And it's like one little funnel of production that all that happens at. So they did stuff like that. And I was like so inspired. I also was like, we were living in, we were in our 20s. It was the smallest kitchen. The dishwasher, we didn't have a dishwasher. We had a sink, was always just overflowing with everything that they were cooking. And I didn't have a space in the fridge really, but I got to watch these guys and how they built what they built and the way that they told their stories. And I took a lot of inspiration from their abilities. I was working at the time as a textbook editor at a division of Condé Nast, editing textbooks on fashion design and interiors design.
Oh, that's so fun.
It was so fun. And it was so dry. And so my boss at the time, she had kind of like an emergency all staff. And she was like, that's it. I've had it. You guys need to find something to keep your minds fresh. And she explained that she had been blogging, and she had been blogging a novel, I think. She was like doing like a serialized novel on a blog. And she said, Max, why don't you write about, I don't know, you're always dressed so nice. Why don't you write about menswear or something like that? And I was like, light bulb. And so I started writing about that, and it just became kind of a catch-all for all the things that I was interested in. Occasionally I'd post a mixtape. Occasionally I'd post about something completely off base, a film I loved, or, a person that I really loved. But the thing that got me noticed was a similar thing where I went to the source on something. I had been blogging for a couple months in one of the Condé Nast buildings in New York at the time. And I was riding the elevator and somebody said, I love your blog. And somebody else overheard it and they said, what's your blog? And it happened to be a fashion editor at a men's magazine. And he said, oh, I'll go check it out. And he and I started emailing, and I asked him if he would get lunch. He advised me to focus on something that I was really passionate about, which was the classics, American-made, usually inspired by something militaristic or industrial revolution era, the dungarees, the denims, the bean boot. So it was the bean boot that was the first thing. And this fashion editor put me in touch with LL Bean's PR team. And he said, this guy's going to come up and he's going to document your factory, your bean boot factory. And I called this college kid who was in Maine, who I was a fan of his blog, and I said, "Hey, you take great pictures. Would you want to come with me?" His name was Foster Huntington, and the two of us kind of met at the factory, walked in the doors, and the next thing I knew, we were triple stitching rubber to leather, and we posted the pictures and the stories that we documented that day on our respective blogs, and they kept getting shared. And it was shared by bigger outlets, GQ and Details and Esquire and the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. Were all talking about these two, wiry-haired bloggers who went and documented a factory. The next thing I know, every factory in America is saying like, "Hey, can you come do that for me?" So I had to learn how to use a camera, and I had to learn like how to kind of maneuver around a factory. And one of the first places that I documented was Gitman, the place that you just mentioned. And
what a coincidence.
I met Chris through some friends who had who have a store in Wisconsin, and documented the factory, wrote about it. He kind of shared it around the company, and I was quickly asked if I would want to come help them out, work with them in some way. And I adored Chris. And so it didn't work out at first. And I was getting kind of burnt out on New York. I was feeling like I was tired of the dishes piling up in the sink, the tiny rooms, frankly, the textbook editor job just wasn't for me. And so I packed up at the end of my lease in the beginning of the summer of 2009. I moved back to my parents' house here in St. Louis. And about 2 weeks later, the CEO of the company that owns Gitman called me and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm sitting watching golf on TV with my dad. Happy 4th of July." And he said, "Perfect. Stay right there. You're going to be our Midwestern sales rep." And I started to expand my network. So I had like a 12 or 13 state territory of the Midwest where I was basically on the road almost every day. I would go out for a month and come back and dump my luggage out in the laundry room, wash my luggage, dry my luggage or my laundry and put it back in the luggage and then go back out that Monday. And in the process, I started meeting all of these people that were making things all over the country. And one of the people that I met along the way was somebody that had followed my blog and then became something of my patron saint. He helped me immensely, was this guy named Joe Gannon. And Joe and I, we started traveling together to meet these makers. I should say that the blog started to kind of dwindle because I got a directive from my bosses at Gitman that said, "You can't share a blog post until you've gotten a sale." And
what?
So they didn't really understand that like I was helping to spread the gospel of Made in America through their company to all these other companies. I continued to document those factories. I continued to kind of like develop the relationships. I just didn't necessarily keep All Plat Out going in the way that I would have liked, because I felt like I would have lost my job. But I met Joe. Joe and I started traveling to some folks that made stuff. And one night we were sleeping on the floor of a friend's like living room. We had just spent the night making belts and belt buckles with this friend. And Joe said that was really fun. And one of us said to the other one, "We should like film this."
Yeah.
And so it was like only a couple months later, we were back in that same living room making belts and belt buckles out in the yard. And we shot a pilot for a show we called Made Right Here. I have a certificate. I spent 2 years at an acting conservatory, and I had my designs in college on becoming a broadcast journalist. So I was very comfortable in front of the camera.
Perfect.
And then there's this big strapping Joe who is, naturally handsome and has just like a natural appeal.
Yeah, with his
camera.
big handlebar mustache.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And the two of us we hit it off really well. I was kind of like the historian, the nerd, the guy that was there to help express the importance of what we were documenting. And Joe was there to show just how hard their job was. So we would sit down together, and I would invariably break a needle or like take a riveter and destroy something. And Joe would come in and show, like, with time and patience and precision, these are time-honored traditions and time-honored trades that people pass from one generation to the next. And for about the next 5 years, I spent 2 weeks of every month in a factory. I started doing it with Joe, with Made Right Here. We got sponsorship from a coffee company called Maxwell House Coffee, that in this country is owned by Kraft Foods, or I think it's actually now owned by a company called Mondelez. And around the time that the pilot came out, another friend at Jim Beam saw it, and she said, "Hey, we're trying to do something similar with one of our products. Would you want to come help?" And that became Basil Hayden's. Basil Hayden's Bourbon did not have a website. It was part of this small batch family of bourbons that Jim Beam was making and trying to give some substance to. And we thought, well, it's made in America. The bottles are hand assembled in their factory in Kentucky. Let's see what we can do. And so I was given carte blanche. And again, I traveled from coast to coast, and I documented makers, craftspeople, artisans, farmers, local bartenders, and I made, like, all this stuff in America, and it all had to do with just celebrating your backyard, celebrating the people that you might have overlooked in your own neighborhood, that are doing things that are high quality, that are done the right way. And I built a career out of that. I became kind of like this brand builder, but with a specialty in heritage, in American made, in true American history. So,
which is cool. Like really probably will obviously become your passion, is like this kind of, beautiful romantic, story of how things are made in America. You must have seen so many different makers and different kinds of products being made in America. What was like, do you have any kind of like highlights, maybe the weirdest or like most, unique kind of things being made?
Yeah, so that's a great question. One of the things that we always went into the factory with was, who's the oldest person here? Who's been working here the longest? Who's the newest person here? Who's the strangest person here? Who's the person that, just lights up the room? Who's the most outgoing? Who's the least outgoing? And we talked to all of those folks. We wanted to talk to kind of the extremes to get a sense of the character, right?
Yeah.
And you're right that I bumped into so many incredible stories just along the way. I was just watching the football helmet factory that's about an hour and a half from St. Louis. They make football helmets and baseball helmets. And it was a mother and a daughter and a cousin that all stand right in a row, and they assemble the inside, the guts of the helmets. And we saw that time and again. At Gitman, there was a grandmother who handed to her daughter, who handed to her daughter all the parts of a shirt sleeve, and seeing how that sort of the grandmother would then criticize her daughter, and her daughter would criticize her daughter. I lit up, because that's what we wanted to show, was that these folks have been doing this way for generations. And the other thing that the sad side of it is that a lot of times to make things in this country, it's really expensive to keep up with minimum wages, to keep up with union rules and union laws. Yeah. Especially, if you are unionized, God willing, it's expensive. And often the things that the individuals in the factory are making, they can't even afford themselves. A success story there I saw right after I went to the LL Bean boot factory, I went to the Quaddy moccasin factory. And the day I was there in 2009, March of 2009, I asked a gentleman, I noticed that you're not wearing the shoes. And he said, I can't afford them. And a few years later, I went back with Basil Hayden's, and everybody in the factory was wearing Quaddy. Now, it might have been a plant, but I believe that they got the message that we need to take good care of our people. Yeah. We need to provide for them in ways that they can afford to at least provide for themselves. So,
absolutely.
It's sad.
Yeah.
It's really sad.
I feel like, this is the case with many countries, is that, the globalized marketplace has become very competitive, and, there are political forces at play. There are many factors at play that make products, for example, made in America or made in the UK, made in Japan even now, that, these products are becoming very, very expensive because of, simple, wages, so many factors. But at the same time, I feel like products made from these countries are sought out because of their heritage, because of the fact that you can trust that they are of a very high quality. Quality control is very important. And I think that's in theory, that is why you would make in countries like these. But in some cases, there are arguments that made in America, I would argue that, you can have a certain level of quality anywhere, whether you make it in India, in China, in America, wherever. But the real question is, what is the factory like? How are they treating their factory workers? What are their health? Is there health insurance? What are the, exactly. How are their makers being looked after? Which is the real question that consumers aren't really asking, because, this is kind of a behind the scenes area of the industry that the industry guard. And it's because, obviously it's being guarded because there are a lot of untruths, that need guarding. You're
treading very carefully out into this conversation. I really appreciate that. And I'm here to just jump right in. I will jump in feet first.
For it.
But let me just say that there is high quality and low quality everywhere. This is not controversial what I'm saying. Everyone is aware of this, that certain places do certain things better than other places. Certain places have certain rules in place and regulations in place that allow them to do things in a way that's different or differently better than other places. And certain cultures, certain ways of life are celebrated, and in other cultures, that same way of life might be denigrated. And I saw all of that, and I've seen all of that throughout my career. And one of the things that drives me absolutely crazy is that when people are like, oh, that's Max, he's a made in America freak. I'm a quality freak. I want to dispel the rumors. I appreciate and admire and love American-made brands and American-made goods, but only the ones that I find hold up over time. Homer Laughlin China Company, Ebbetsfield Flannels,
Nice.
Gitman Brothers. But even the Gitman Brothers factory has its problems, and I can say firsthand because I spent a couple years, pacing the 4 football fields steep floors of that beautiful factory dug into the Schuylkill Mountains in the basement of Shelley Gitman's apartment. Not to rant, but it's a shame. It's a real shame what's happening to a lot of that story and that piece of us, that small town America is going the way of the dinosaur. I was born in a small town. I just wrote about this a little bit, but I love and admire small towns. They mean the world to me, and they are where the character of America, of that bootstrap mentality, comes from. The desire to stay and establish yourself in the community where you were reared, and the contrasting desire to get out and prove them all wrong. Right? That's the American narrative, and those are two wonderful American narratives amongst many. But to get back to the quality piece, Gitman doesn't make a delicate, flowing Brunello Cucinelli. They make a hard-wearing Oxford cloth button-down with a chalk button. These are pearl buttons, I realize, but they started with chalk buttons, and it had everything to do with the fact that in 1978, when the Gitman brothers were sitting on yards and yards of fabric, they needed an inexpensive button to go with it because they simply couldn't afford to put these shirts out. And then the chalk button became their motif. It became like a symbol. And then it became adopted by Brooks Brothers and Ralph Lauren and all these other companies in the early 80s and into the 90s. Anyway, the fact is, not everybody can do everything the best. And I've seen really poor quality. I've chosen to kind of turn a blind eye to it, or not necessarily shine as bright a light on those makers. And similarly, in China, in Japan, in India, in Canada, in Mexico, all over Europe, Russia, Africa, there are high quality makers everywhere. And it's always been my desire to find them, to seek them out, to talk about them, to showcase them. And I'm hoping that in a post-COVID world, we can become even more globally minded than we've ever been before. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if that's necessarily where you were going with this conversation, but
we absolutely are. I definitely think that in the post-COVID world, yes, we will be more globalized because we already have become more globalized in this short space of time. So that goes without saying.
I'm talking to you through my computer screen. You are in Thailand. I am in Missouri.
Yeah.
I am in Mark Twain's Missouri. Like,
exactly.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
And it's your morning, it's my evening, and I'm thrilled, truly thrilled to see the world become more close knit and to have this opportunity. Lauren, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
When was the first time that you did a video call?
When was the first time oh my gosh. I feel like I was in university. I think it was probably I don't know, I'm guessing here. When did Skype? I feel like it's whenever Skype came out. Yeah. And we are using Skype today. How long ago was that? 2007?
2003?
Oh, 2000. Okay, maybe for me it was probably around 2007, but I'm quite backwards in terms of for someone my generation.
Not at all. I remember at my high school we had the opportunity. There was a TV that had this giant camera on top of it, and we did that only a couple times with a classroom. Yeah, I think it was in France, in my French class. We would have conversations in English with them one week, and then conversations with them in French the next week in the 90s. But through the computer screen, I was working in design at a catalog company that's called J. Crew, and my video call was with a woman who was one of our producers in Shenzhen, and it was the first time that I understood that she lived at her office. And that was what I was hinting at before, that there are cultures where that's appreciated and that's understood, that you're going to sleep at your desk sometimes. I think that culture is shifting away, especially in places like Shenzhen. But I was on a Skype call and I was like, wait, is that a bed? And she was like, yeah, that's where I sleep.
Yeah.
And I was like, how often? She was like, oh, just like, a couple nights here and there.
Yeah.
But that
my problem,
blew my mind.
Yeah, my biggest part of the reason why I started this podcast is because, there are so many big brands who are not asking proper questions like how are the people who make our clothes being treated? How are they being paid? Do they have social security? What are their working conditions? And that is exactly, a good window into the work culture that shouldn't be endorsed. Like sleeping at your office, like meaning that you are it is expected of you to be working such long hours. And this is typical of Chinese manufacturing, to be honest. Like, I'm not saying that every Chinese factory is, does have
Certainly
poor
not.
working standards, but a big portion do. And that, we're talking about communist China. Like my grandmother, who is Chinese, had to flee China when the Communist Party took over.
Wow.
Millions and millions of people died. We are talking about a very serious thing, and I feel like a lot of people don't understand these histories that come. Yeah, like kids don't learn history. They learn very basic history in school, and it is a history of whatever agenda the government body that puts together the educational curriculum decides to put on that curriculum. But yeah, we need to ask serious questions about who's making our stuff, and I think brands are not held accountable. I don't expect a brand to have integrity. It's great when a brand does, but I don't expect companies to have, integrity. But I do expect government bodies to be on their tails about that. But unfortunately, that doesn't really
Absolutely.
happen. Yeah, but
there's so many different factors at play, especially in this country, as it relates to certain lobbies. And certain tax cuts, tax breaks that are made for certain industries, and other industries largely go unnoticed. But back to that woman that was sleeping at her desk, I was relaying that story to a young woman that I was dating at the time in New York City. She was a clothing designer, and she said, "Oh, you need to read this book." The book is called Let My People Go Surfing. It's from Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia. And I read it in a weekend. And about 2 weeks after I read it, I was leaving J.Crew. And it took a little bit of time, about 6 months, I think. I temped and waited tables and tried to figure out how I was going to get in. But I got in and I worked at at Patagonia for a couple years. And while I was working at Patagonia, I learned a lot about ethical business practices, about global activism, environmental causes, and grassroots activism. Truly, like at the level that I was in the Hudson River with Robert Kennedy Jr. and Pete Seeger cleaning up the Hudson River with a Patagonia fleece on my back, and awesome. I learned a sort of a different ethic there. I will say that company too has its problems and has its miscues. But as you were saying, all brands have to kind of fail. They have to kind of go through that process in order to learn and be better. Yeah. And I've been I've been on the front lines of that a few different times. The Through the ethical journey, the thing that I keep coming back to is something that we're both fans of Robert Reich. He talks about it. Live more with less.
Yeah.
Support the people that are closest to you and let that reverberate out. Let that be an economical lesson. Whatever you can do to say to your neighbor, hey, I have this thing. I noticed that you don't have it. I don't need it anymore.
Yeah.
Make that part of the conversation. Make that part, whether it's food, putting out a cupboard, or it's a jean jacket that your dad wore in 1967 in high school, whatever it is, just be part of a conversation that's a little bit more, has more touch points to it. I talk a lot about how, like, I grew up with a mother who was a merchant and a father who was a salesperson. And I learned hand feel, and I learned trend, and I learned colors, and I learned seasons. But hand feel extends well beyond a piece of Oxford cloth. It goes into everything. How you, and Maya Angelou, right? She's quoted as saying, people will forget what you say, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And I truly believe those words to be true. I've learned since that she didn't actually say that, but she might have borrowed it from somebody else. But still, the meaning is there. And this is a time to refocus too. I've taken a lot of time during quarantine and during, spending a lot of time with my family to rearrange my priorities and really focus on the things that matter, and frankly, the people who matter. And one of the things that really mattered to me was making sure that we celebrate this man, Tony Fauci. Thank you, Dr. Fauci.
Yeah.
And that we celebrate people like my friend. Like my friend Micah. Micah is a brilliant artist and a wonderful illustrator, and I want to support people that I love, and I want the support right back. And Micah and I have that relationship, and it's wonderful. And I feel very similarly about you. I'm still trying to remember when I first found Ponytail Journal, but like
a while ago.
When did you start Ponytail Journal?
I started the blog in 2013. Yeah.
Okay.
And then I started my brand, Women's Wear, in 2015. Yeah.
15.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So it's been 5 years.
So that happened really quick.
Yeah, the 2 years. That was all because of Mr. Nigel Caborn.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that relationship? How did you and Nigel first meet?
I first met Nigel because at the time I was doing only Ponytail Journal, and I was writing about style for Vogue Australia. And that really opened so many doors for me because I had this key to access, to have conversations with so many people I really admired and respected. So I was in London and I organized an interview with Nigel. And it was at the Army Gym, which is his store in Covent Garden. And we sat down and it was just like soulmates, like two people who just love the same things and who are just open, we're pretty young at heart, and we just hit it off. So after the interview, I just felt like I'd met a long lost friend, and we just started hanging out all the time. And
That's so awesome.
Yeah, and then he kind of took me under his wing and said, hey, Lauren, you've got this really great thing that you've built, Ponytail Journal. Why don't you should make a small range of clothing to sell on your blog. And you should just start really small, 5 pieces. And then it went from there. And, I I was so fortunate that he took me on. I never studied fashion design. I went to art school, so I studied photography at art school and art history. But I guess Nige took me under his wing. He taught me how to run a fashion business, how to do costings for the garments, how to use Illustrator and design clothing, how to understand fabrics. So I owe so much to him, and so I started. Yeah, I started with a very small range of workwear. And I partnered up with this guy called Ben Viapiana. He's a Canadian denim tailor, but he was based in Bangkok at the time. And he had this,
Canadian denim tailor.
Yes.
Just for the international audience, yes. The Canadian tuxedo is a denim on denim.
Yes.
So that he's actually living that.
Yes, and now he's back in Canada. Awesome. He is back in Canada, being true to his brand, and he's making tailored denim in Canada. But yeah, so we started. He had this shipping container that he fitted out, completely decked out with beautiful vintage machines and an aircon, an AC unit, because in Thailand it's always hot. And, we made this collection of workwear, and, straight off the bat, Nigel introduced me to his partner, his Japanese partner, Sam Segure in Tokyo, and Sam distributed my brand from the beginning. So he did that he distributed the brand for 4 seasons. Then I decided that I was ready to go independent and take my clothes to the rest of the world, and do the trade shows in Paris and New York, and yeah, I am so fortunate to have that. But at the same time, I worked 7 days a week for 3 years. When I started the brand, I had I got so many new white hairs on this side of my head, because manufacturing is, when you're young and you're starting out and you have no idea what you're doing, you make so many mistakes, and there is failure upon failure. And that's what it feels like. It was like I am in the sea, I'm in the ocean, and the waves will never stop coming. But every time a wave comes, you learn how to duck dive that wave and, navigate that a little better each time. And the wave affects you less emotionally every time. And, but you just know that the waves will always be coming. So, yeah. That's how I have done it. Mentorship, having a mentor is so essential. Yes. In this business, in any business. And it's something that, I have often sought, and I'm incredibly jealous of your relationship with Nigel. I met Nigel in 2010. The summer show at Pitti Uomo, Uomo, and I was wearing a vintage 80s pastel plaid with a flap pocket, made in a Hong Kong tailor's shop. And he said to Chris, "Why aren't you making this?" And then Daiki Suzuki said the same thing, and from Engineer Garments. And then Mark McNary came over and he's like, "This kid's shirt is great. You should make this." And so, or maybe it was, I don't remember what it was, but we made that shirt. Nice. And it was because of Nigel. Yeah. And then this domino effect of one vintage piece. And that's Chris's brand, is, taking something that existed and then bringing it into the modern era. And I think all of those designers,
I loved all those guys.
Yeah, I think all of those guys, Daiki, Mark McNary, I don't know personally, but I love his work. And Nigel, they all take from vintage. I think Nigel told me, because Nigel's had his business for over 50 years now, and he told me that actually the person who taught him how to design off vintage military pieces was actually Paul Smith, who worked for Nigel at the time. This was like decades ago, but in Nigel's early business, Paul used to work for Nige, and I think one
And
thing
Ian
that
Paley learned from Paul, and like one generation begets the next, and
and
we Ian Paley of Garb Store.
right, and I think that's what's beautiful, and I think that's a profound understanding that I very much get from Nige is it's all about passing it on. It's all about passing on the goodness, the knowledge to the next generation and not keeping it all for yourself. Like, it is a very competitive business, but the thing that I love about more so the men's fashion scene versus the women's scene, is that there's this light-hearted there's this friendship that forms, and there's this openness of, giving that goodness to the next generation so that this creativity can continue, and working with integrity, working with good makers, and making creating creative ideas that are unique and not from something that you've already seen in a storefront or on Instagram these days. So many people get their inspiration from Instagram that, it's not about that. It's about living your passion, in real life.
It's the same thing with the shirt, with the ladies with the shirt sleeve, and Gitman handing down that tradition, handing down that and having that relationship. The family that assembles the insides of the football helmets. Every business has this. Menswear is one where it really easily shows up and is easily conveyed in the Nigel to Paul Smith to Ian Paley of Garb Store story, where you can see very clearly the progeny. You can understand how Margaret Howell came to be. You can understand how all of these different, and how you came to be, frankly. And I think that, I owe a great deal of debt to Leon Wood Bean, to Mr. Abercrombie and Fitch, to the Brooks Brothers. And I think about it, and I think about like how the fetishization of all of that, the fetishization of Gore-Tex at the time that Gore-Tex was coming out, and like ripping it from the Patagonia catalog and taping it to my bedroom wall, and like thinking about it in these terms of like, this is changing the way that I operate. And there's that part as well, that like, if it wasn't for my experiences as a young man fetishizing and understanding, the nerd culture that surrounds product, I wouldn't be able to pass that love and that passion onto anybody else. And I think that it's going to be our jobs to ensure that Instagram isn't where this stuff dies, that it lives on in life, in and around us, and we help them to understand the value of something that is built to last, that is not made to be obsolete. Permanent obsolescence, or whatever that's called, the built-in obsolescence of a thing, like that's something that I see in my children. They just expect that their tennis shoes are going to wear out in a couple months, and they expect that certain things are going to be replaceable or replaced. I still have, it's right here, I still have my very first Patagonia Snap Tee, navy blue. I received it when I was in middle school, 13 or 14 years old, for my birthday. And it's still this is my dad got this when he was 16. And it's still on my body So like
It's still got
those are
such
the
a
kinds of
rich
stories.
blue. It's still got a rich deep blue denim on it, like for being worn for so long, for 2 generations.
Right.
Yeah,
And it has to do with the fact that like he took really good care of it, and I feel obligated to take
yeah,
really good care of it in return.
yeah,
So
right. Now, moving on, I want to ask you, because you did,
sure.
tell me about you are planning to start a new project called No
Yep.
First. Tell me about that.
Yep.
You're going to start a podcast, and what is your podcast going to be about?
Thank you for bringing that up, Lauren. I really appreciate it. I'm nervous as all hell, frankly, to talk about it. To be talking about it on a podcast makes me even more nervous. But it's something that I'm way late to. I was pretty early to blogging. I'm way late to starting a podcast. But I told you I wanted to be a broadcast journalist. I love, the minute that I got my driver's license here in St. Louis, the first place I drove, literally the day I got my driver's license, I drove to a mobile DJ company. I
Oh,
love the microphone.
yeah.
I've loved it since I was 16. I've always wanted to kind of interact with people. And I especially love reaction. I went through a pretty tough time not too long ago. I moved halfway across the country. I took a relationship with me. I had a job when I left. I didn't basically shortly after I arrived. And I found myself crawling back to my home, St. Louis, where I've reestablished myself in a very different way than I ever had before. And it feels different. It feels, for me, more meaningful. It feels like I had to hit rock bottom to understand what solid ground felt like. And one of the things that kind of kept me going through that was something that the original All Plat Out carried, which was the tagline from Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher: know first who you are and then adorn yourself accordingly. Now, when I read that at 26, 27 years of age, and I first jotted it down in a field notes, I think I meant, like how you adorn yourself, but really it's how you carry yourself, how you live and walk through the world.
Yes.
And my intention is to draw from my guests, and occasionally it'll be guestless. It'll just be an opportunity for me to exposit on a lesson or a anecdote or a story that I've heard. Is the stories of reclamation, the redemption songs, the understanding that you can go to the brink and live to tell the tale. I've always been a big believer that it's more about the journey than it is the destination, and that the adventure doesn't really begin until the plans go awry.
Yeah.
And mixing all of that together, I want to talk to people who have failed and lived to tell the tale, who have had many careers, who have had many different versions of themselves, as I have. And so that's where it sort of germinates from. I recorded some episodes. I recorded like an introduction, and I played it for my wife and for my children. They were like, boring. So it was very low energy and sort of like very quiet NPR, like this is the No First podcast. And they're like, you need to like jazz it up and make it like really funky.
And be real.
So,
be yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what it's going to be. I really appreciate you asking. It's like I said, it's super nerve-wracking. And again, sort of like refocusing my life and looking back and looking forward a little bit through this time of the coronavirus. I relaunched All Plat Out. I put together a shop. I put some products together with some friends, and we're just going to kind of wing it. We're going to see what sticks to the wall and what doesn't. And it just feels like the time for it, just to try again. I admire the way that you put yourself together so much, because even with that original Ponytail journal, I remember going to it and being like, this is an experience. The way that you develop a world is how I want to, and on my best day I do, but you seem to do it all the time, and I think maybe I just need to work 7 days a week. I think that's what it is.
Oh my God,
I tend
please
to take
don't
a break
do that.
every once in a while.
Yeah, like that kills me. Like 3 years of working 7 days a week, I like had crazy anxiety problems. I also hit, I hit a point where I was like, if I keep doing this, I won't be able to do this anymore. So I had a lot of learning curves in my very short, span. But yeah, I realized that yes, you have to be dedicated to something, but you also, for creativity, you need to give yourself a break. And I realized that creativity comes from when you have space in your mind and when you have that time to let go and not think about work at all. And honestly, like, even though the shit storm keeps brewing, and the waves keep coming, I feel like I've gotten to a point where where terrible news doesn't faze me anymore. Because I have even a bigger workload than I did when I was working 7 days a week, but I'm not working 7 days a week anymore. I have time. I purposely make time for the people who are important to me, and that gives me more richness, more space, and helps me. Work feels just more effortless now. But I think making my universes, it's been a very selfish thing in a way. I've just always done whatever the hell I want to do. And that's super selfish. But at the same, and nothing that I put out, I feel like is ever perfect, but I'd rather put it out there and get it out and get people appreciating it rather than keeping things behind closed doors for years and years and never putting something out and then just never having anything out. So, there's a fine line between the two of them. Oh, good. Get it out there. Get no first out there.
Yeah, done. Done is better than perfect.
Yes.
Prioritize done over prioritizing perfect. Yeah. The thing that I have I've held kind of close to the vest here is that I took on another thing just this week.
Wow.
I was having a conversation with my wife about my priorities and like things that I've always wanted to do. And she said, you always talk about your alma mater. And I don't know if you can see that red devil behind me, but
yes,
that's a chenille red devil from the letter jacket of my high school.
Oh, wow.
And I went to an all-boys Catholic high school whose mascot was a red devil, which,
that's
how
crazy.
perfect is that?
Yeah.
Motivating young men and turning them into red devils. I took on one of my mentors passed away not too long ago, and I've taken on his business class. I'm going to be teaching 2 hours a week to high school students.
Oh, wow.
An introduction to business class. So for those of you listening out there, if you have tips, tricks, anything, any lesson plans, I'm open. I'm going to be injecting a lot of our conversation, though, into that class, helping this next generation of young people. And this goes back to what we were talking about, passing it on. I want them to understand and kind of live with me through what I've experienced, that you can leave the job that seemed like the dream job when you got it. And then you realized, I actually am developing a different ethic. And my ethic is more closely aligned with something that's closer to this. And telling those stories and understanding how to build and promise a product that is meaningful and is high quality. And so it's like the honor of my life. And I feel like the luckiest guy in the world right now.
Yeah, that is so rich. That's going to be so fulfilling. And I think that goes back to the idea of passing it on to the next generation. I think two words that I have in mind that I feel like are so important for people to understand when they're starting business, or just for themselves as well, is one is responsibility. Take responsibility for your happiness. Take responsibility for doing things right. And two, which is very similar, is integrity. Make things that have integrity in yourself. I think they're the biggest lessons I've learned in life, and I continue to fail and try again. But yeah.
But with trying, there's my two words would be humility and sincerity. And imbuing that into your product and you do that so naturally that I can't imagine why you would have thought of those words, because they're in your aura. They're who you are. They're how you live. But I have to actually work at humility, and I have to actually work at sincerity. So trust me when I say that, like, yeah. But it's definitely like it's the way. I've been reading lots and lots of criticisms and critiques of places like Brooks Brothers and even J. Crew as they're suffering during this time, and the question of, the factory store and the broadening of their SKUs rather than narrowing focus and focusing on those four things. That's really what it's all about. Build the best thing you can in the best way you can. When the Garland, North Carolina shirt factory, it was first announced that they would be closing, I turned to my wife and I said, could we save it? What could we do? And she said, I'm sure we could pull together some investors, and you could keep pumping out blue Oxford cloth shirts, but I don't know how we would do it. That is me, though. That's what I would do. I would want to save a place like that. And that goes back to the beginning of our conversation, understanding and valuing the communities of our small towns throughout the world, but especially throughout this country.
Well, that is an awesome place to leave this conversation, Max. Thank you so much for being on the Ponytail show. And for people out there who want to check out what you're doing, how can they do that?
Well, they can follow me on Instagram at Max Wastler, or go to my blog, allplatout.com.
Awesome. Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Lauren.